Hello again. Welcome to Pride Inside. What's an online event without muting yourself accidentally? So, my name is Sabah. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am the head of youth service at Gender Intelligence, a national trans youth charity in the UK. Today, I'm here as your host for our wonderful panel. We're talking Being Young at Pride, where we are centering young people in our movements. We're hearing how they got into activism and how to move from self-care to collective care. So Pride Inside launched last weekend on the very same day as the Stonewall riots 50 years ago, a day which showed the world what acts of resistance look like, and a movement that was led by trans women of color. And they fought against police raids, against police brutality. They fought for youth homelessness, and they advocated for sex workers. They sparked a revolution in LGBTQ rights and activism and civil rights. So this riot and subsequent protests, they paved the way for the Pride celebrations that we know today. Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, and Stormé, they started our movement. Pride Inside has now been running for over 2 weeks now and has been filled with amazing music, drag performances, workshops and speeches, and so much more. So do make sure you check out what else is happening on the full program online. And if you have any questions or comments for the panel today, feel free to leave them on our Facebook event, and we'll come to those at the end of our panel with a live Q&A. So tonight we are joined with an amazing panel of young people. I'm so excited to meet them all. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Shaneel Lal.
Kia ora, everyone. Good morning if you're listening from New Zealand, and good afternoon if you are in the UK. My name is Shaneel Lal. My pronouns are he. In New Zealand, we are very privileged to have laws that have allowed homosexuality to be legal and allow us to have same-sex marriage. However, after years of progressive activism, in New Zealand, conversion therapy still remains legal. I co-founded the Conversion Therapy Action Group to work towards a ban of conversion therapy in New Zealand. Thank you.
Thank you. It's such important work you're doing, and really appreciate you being here at about 5 or 6 a.m. I think it is for you. Next, we'll go to Georgia Hejduková.
Hello, my name is Georgia. I'm from the Czech Republic, which is in the middle of the Europe, if you don't know. I created my own organization called Stop Bullying, in Czech translation, which is trying to end practice of bullying in school, which is very high actually in Czech Republic. And also I work with Amnesty International, and I'm actually going to schools and I'm telling people what it's like to be trans and how people should behave when they encounter a trans person. Sorry, that's me.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to hear more about your journey into getting into those schools. So thank you, Georgia. Next, we've got Issy Booth.
So I am a queer disabled young person living in rural Suffolk in the UK. So I work for a rape crisis centre here in the UK, but I've also been part of Amnesty's first ever Rise Up programme, and as a result of that have been inspired to create our own activism programme for young women in my county. So I'm really, really pleased to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you, Issy. Really glad to have all of you here. I really have a really good feeling about the conversations we're going to have today. So to start with, I'm sure that we can all just agree that the last few months have been really challenging, and it's just been really hard. And I know there are probably a lot of people out there who are finding themselves wanting to mobilize and do more, but thinking, where do I start? So I'd like to know where you all started, and I wonder, Shaneel, if you want to kick us off and tell me what are you passionate about and how did you turn that into activism?
Thank you. I think my passion really comes from the from my identity, my intersectional identity, being a gay man, and I'm not limited to that. When I look at my intersectional identity, I see that I am a brown person, I am an immigrant, I am an indigenous person. So when I put all of these things together, I fall to the bottom of the queer social hierarchy. But there are people who can fall even further, such as trans people, intersex people, because in New Zealand, those people are not explicitly protected in our human rights laws. So for me, it was about recognizing what privileges I had in the system and being able to use those privileges to advocate for people that didn't have those rights. So when I looked at conversion therapy as an issue in New Zealand, I was very frustrated because no one was doing anything about it. So I thought, maybe let's start. And in the beginning, no one listened to me, but after years of activism, it has become a national conversation.
That's amazing. Thank you. I love that it's just you being your whole self, your identity, all parts of you that really has brought out your passion. Georgia, I wonder if you could talk a bit about what you're passionate about, how that turned into activism for you.
Well, as I already said, I'm passionate about bullying, and the reason is, well, it's simple. I have been bullied for 12 years, so I very much understand what it's like to experience to being the guy who is in the corner, or in my case, the girl who is in the corner. And this is basically why I always wanted to help people who are not able to help themselves to do what they want to, because if you are bullied in school, you cannot do what you want because you are constantly put away by people who are more stronger than you. Maybe they have a better social position in a class. So I always wanted to help those people, and this is how I actually got into all of my activism, basically, because it's always connected to helping the weaker people or the people who are not able to do what they want to in their lives.
Yeah, and I'm wondering how important it must be to look after yourself as well within that. You know, you're campaigning against bullying because you were bullied. And we'll come into self-care a bit later, but it might be a funny question, but I wonder if there's a particular moment that stands out for you, the moment where you decided, you know, I've had enough and I'm going to do something about this.
I don't think I can pick an exact moment. I think it was after I basically started advocating, and I started saying, okay, there are some problems that here and there that I've experienced. And actually a lot of people contacted me directly and said, okay, I have a problem with this also. And I also had experienced this. And suddenly I was sort of flooded with people who had same terrible experience as I. And this is something that really motivated me to change it and to do something about it, because I said, okay, this is wrong because so many people feel terrible and it needs to be stopped.
Yeah, I can see George is nodding over there. I wonder if you want to come in. Sorry, George, do you want to share what got you into activism and what you're passionate about?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't realize it was my cue. No worries. So I think mine was my passion was kind of aligned a little bit more with you there, Shaneel. So I am bisexual, so I never felt particularly enough within the queer community, and I'm a person who lives with a invisible illness, so I also didn't feel enough within the disabled community. And so when I started thinking about intersections of my identity, there was this overarching feeling of not being enough, and once I felt strong enough to vocalize that, I actually was met with lots and lots of other people who were bisexual or had who were disabled and part of the LGBTQ queer community. And every single person also said to me that they had had a time where they hadn't felt enough. And I think that feeling of inadequacy and also desperately wanting to belong and do something good really is where my passion came from. And whenever I struggle or feel those moments of, oh, am I not enough? Am I not doing enough? I try to go back to where that started and just do small things, really. So
That's so nice. And apologies for getting your name wrong, Issy.
that's all right.
um, I love that, and you also for you, it's about your intersectional experience and finding out all these parts of yourself as well. And similar to what Georgia said as well, that this one kind of small experience that you had is something that other people could relate to, and there's an experience that community share, which has given you the passion to, or that drive to do something about it. Was there a particular moment for you that stands out to get to where you are now?
I think it would probably be around when I was at university and I was just finding a queer community, which at the time didn't particularly exist in my county. And it was constantly being faced with accessibility issues of queer spaces not being good for me as a disabled person, but also this feeling of like, you know, oh, am I here? I'm just bisexual. And this just that I kind of felt. So I think university was a turning point for me because it was the first time I was out in the world and both of those intersections were limiting me. But it was also the greatest time because I met the best people and had the best conversations that allowed me to take action in the way that I do now. So I think that would be a defining, I mean, university is for lots of people, but university for me was a key turning point in, okay, I need to speak about this constantly.
Yeah, and the university experience as well as kind of seeing the limits to your experience, that kind of just or not feeling enough, but actually that's something that you really kind of grew from, which I think well, a few of us I can definitely relate to as well. I really like hearing from you both already because you've already shared that there's not a defining moment to becoming an activist. There's not like a one time thing. And I wonder, Shaneel, what was it like for you? Was there a defining moment? You talked about those
Uh,
frustrations.
I think it is ironic that we're talking about queer rights and human rights on Amnesty International UK, particularly if you acknowledge its colonial history with indigenous communities. So I am Itoke and I am Girmitia. So and I absolutely cannot talk about queer rights without actually talking about how all our indigenous sexualities and genders got ripped away because of how Britain colonized indigenous communities. If anything, Britain owes all indigenous people an apology and colonial reparations, because apologies are just not enough in 2020. So I would just say that for me, the turning moment was learning about the brutal acts of violence that were committed against my ancestors. In that moment, I knew that I would do everything and anything possible to decolonize this world.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. Decolonizing our identities, our sexualities, our genders is a really important part of my own journey too. So really happy that you brought that. Was there anything in particular? I mean, how did you learn about that? Because it's not something we get taught in schools. Um, I'm really curious.
We have a very Eurocentric education system in New Zealand, and I think a lot of countries do, and we don't learn about our own. So, for example, the indigenous people of New Zealand are Maori, and we don't even learn about their history. So, for me, was doing a lot of my own research and talking to my great grandmother, who told me that being gay is not something new. That homophobia is not something that her ancestors practiced, but something her descendants assimilated to. That homophobia is a modern concept, a colonial introduction. And my great grandmother now lives in Fiji. So listening from her telling me that I am her wildest dream and the colonizer's nightmare gave me so much hope and passion to just use my privilege and use my voice.
Oh, that was really lovely to hear. The colonizer's nightmare and your grandmother's wildest dream. That's quite beautiful. Was there anything else, Georgia or Issy, you wanted to add before we move on to the next question? Great. So yeah, we've kind of started talking about you as individuals, and even just in those kinds of stories about how you got to activism, it's already about other people. So and even your grandma and other people reaching out online and people at your university experience. And a huge part of activism is being a part of that collective or a movement. And I think a part of that is we forget about self-care and how to look after ourselves. So I want to know more about how we can move from self-care to collective care. I imagine self-care is something that you probably talk about a lot. It's quite common in the spaces anyway. Georgia, can we start with you? So thinking about how care and well-being can be an individual's responsibility, and maybe that's something you could really relate to, having experienced bullying as well. So how do you think we can move from self-care to collective care, from I to we?
Well, I think, first of all, I would like to say self-care is important because a lot in this world when everyone is constantly rushing for something and everybody is trying to have something now immediately and like ideally like as effectively as possible, we are forgetting that this is not the sort of place that we are intended to be. We are intended for much sort of slower pace, and our bodies often cannot sustain this kind of pressure. So it is important to just turn off everything sometimes and go into the forest or into the woods. I often go for long walks into the city, and they are very good for my self-care. And I think, how should we move from the self-care? I think the basic thing would be to care about each other. I often say to my friends that I'm here for them because some people do tend to have, especially in a community of people who have been bullied or who do have psychiatric problems. They often tend to have like bad moods or bad periods. So I'm here for them, and then when, for example, I have a bad mood, they are there for me, and this sort of system works actually very well. And I think this is how we move from self-care to collective care, just with our friends, this system of watch over.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I love what you said about pace and rushing, and how we're not supposed to be moving this fast. And it's like we should really be honoring our bodies and slowing down, whether that is a walk or asking them for help. And I just want to add on a question. So I can hear you probably get quite a lot of people reaching out to you. How do you say no when you can't quite hold it? Or I see everyone's laughing. It's like a fairy tale? How do we say no?
This is actually a very difficult question. You have to learn that. You have to learn to say no, because if you don't, you are going to exhaust yourself beyond possibility. So with me, it was actually really difficult at start because I was so happy because at the beginning of my journey, I was really alone a lot. So I was happy if somebody was with me, even if it was like a one-sided relationship. And you sort of have to learn to set up your own boundaries and calculate how much time you can put in this and what do you need to do. And then it's really like you have to say, okay, but this is my life and I am the owner of this space, and I can absolutely reject this if it's not the matter of like life and death. Then, and it's usually not like that.
Yeah, that sounds like some good boundaries that you're practicing there. Issy, can we come to you next? Tell me about your kind of journey to self-care and making that into collective care.
So I think everybody can always be better at self-care. I think it's an ongoing process and you never quite get it down to a T. But I think when it comes to collective care, for me recently it's been about creating safe spaces that are more community-led. So I was very lucky to get to be a part of the Amnesty Rise Up, and I realised that was the first time I'd been in a room with people where I didn't feel a need to justify myself and I could talk very freely among young people. And similarly with Stonewall back in January. And so I think it's when you're in those safe spaces to push collective care over self-care is to not just think, okay, do I feel safe? Am I okay in this space? But also consider your privilege and other people and then check, are they okay? Do they feel safe in this space? Is there an accommodation I could make for them? What leverage do I have? How can I speak up where they may not feel able to? And I think that just comes down to compassion, really. Compassion as activists, compassion as young people, and just being aware and being honest if you don't understand something or you need help or you just want a bit of a discussion. So I think if you'd have asked me that question last year, I would have really struggled. How do we create collective care? But now I can see bits of it and I love where it's going. So just encouraging those safe spaces for me is the best thing that we can do.
Wow, that was such an amazing answer. And I've never had a definition of collective care like that before, and I feel like I actually understand it a lot better now. Now I've heard you just describe it so simply. It's about being in a space where you're free to be yourself, and of course that's being cared for by a community. I'm just going to keep my microphone, so there we go. And how about when it comes to putting up those boundaries, Izzy, and how do you say no?
I think I don't know. I think I could get better at saying no. But I think it's also important to identify like when to say yes, and when you feel something's going to be really fruitful or really good for you, and start to pick out what feels good, and then you can work out what feels like a stretch or what feels too much, and through that you can then try and learn to say no. But boundaries are something that I think everybody struggles with, because kind of like what Georgia said there, it's in our nature to be there for other people. And so, yeah, it's a difficult question, and maybe I'll find the answer at some point, but I'm not so sure.
It's nice to even hear that it is difficult and it's an ongoing thing. I think that's something that we also need to be reminded of, and I guess in a way that also helps us slow down a bit too. Shaneel, over to you. What's your relationship been like with self-care and community care?
For me, I think it's always really important to establish that New Zealand, unfortunately, has the highest suicide rate in OECD countries. And for queer people, young queer people, they're 5 times more likely to commit suicide and 20 times more likely to develop a severe mental health problem. So I already know that our queer community is at a high risk. But I think I also struggle with the idea of collective care, because the queer community in New Zealand is not a collective. It's actually quite divided between cisgendered white gay men and the rest of the community. So for me, it was actually important to recognize that the queer community does not start with cis men, and it does not end with them either. So uplifting the voices of trans women of color, Black trans women, people who share intersecting identities has been a healing process for my community. I think that recently the Black Lives Matter movement has really showed us that our communities, regardless of color, indigenous or not, are transphobic. If your Black Lives Matter movement does not include Black trans women, then your activism ain't shit. So for me, it was about recognizing that there is intersectional identities in the queer community and that we need to take care of the most vulnerable in our community for the rest of the community to do well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for sharing those really harrowing suicide statistics. And I guess that shows that it's not enough just to have self-care. We really need a community looking out after these communities and looking out for them too. And how centering trans people, Black people, people of color is actually healing for the whole community. I really, really like that. And yeah, last question for this round is, you know what's coming is how have you learned to say no, and how do you practice boundaries?
I think it's important to recognize that when you are a person that is marginalized, when you exist in spaces that weren't designed for you, that in itself is activism. That in itself is an act of defiance. That in itself is saying an F you to the colonial patriarchy. That is a revolution. So queer people don't actually owe the world anything. Like homophobia, queerphobia, transphobia is not a queer people issue. That's a straight cisgendered people issue. Y'all need to sort your stuff out. So for me, I think it's recognizing that I do not need to do anything other than exist for it to be a revolution. So I do not feel guilty when I have to say no to things, but I also understand that not everybody is in that space where they feel that they can value themselves if they're not being productive, the modern way of whether you're deserving of care or not. So just recognizing that you are human and that you need to work at your own pace.
That reminder again around pace. That was great. As queer people, as people of color, as trans people, and people on the margins, we're already doing like work. We're doing so much. Our existence is resistance. It's activism. You know, our survival is activism, and so don't feel guilty about saying no. And I think that's such a nice reminder. And I really hope that people watching this are also hearing that. I think we worry about not doing enough, and we're not doing enough work if we say no. But actually, we're already doing so much. So anything else is really a bonus almost. Yeah, thank you so much for that. That's a really, I'm feeling really full already with all of your answers. So the last question I have for you, and then we'll move on to hearing what we've got from our Facebook comments and questions, is, okay, I'm going to paint a picture. Imagine you're looking at your younger self. I won't tell you what age, just your younger self that you're imagining now. I imagine there were hurdles that you faced, people telling you who you should be or how to act. You might have heard some untrue and unhelpful advice. You might have been told there were things that you couldn't do that you did do. What do you wish you had been told at this time? And I'll go to Issy first.
I think firstly, I would tell myself that you can make a career out of being a feminist. I think younger me would have loved that notion that would be, I just got to live my authentic self every single day. So definitely that one, that would have saved a lot of tears, I'm sure. But also I would I would really tell myself to not lose so many years to bi-erasure and not feeling enough. I would educate myself a lot earlier. I feel I there are things that I should have learned much younger and I should have done more research into, and I think I came into some things quite late, and I would have loved to have known about some incredible people earlier that could have guided me and I could have sought comfort in. Um, what else? I just think again it goes back to that feeling of not being enough, and I loved, even now I'm sat on this panel hearing that from Shaneel, that like we are enough by just existing. To me is still music to my ears even at this age. So I just think having that validation constantly. I'm very proud of what I've done, but I wonder how much more I could have explored at a younger age, and I'm sure younger me would have loved that because she was very curious.
That's wonderful. I won't add anything else to that. I just want to go straight to Georgia, please. What do you wish you'd been told?
Well, this is actually a difficult question for me because on one hand, I sort of would say nothing because even though it's been really hard, and even though there has been so many tears and so many things that went wrong in my life, basically, it kind of ended in a good way because at this point I'm happy. So I honestly do not know if I would like to change something, because then it would change me, and I'm happy with being me right now. So, but hypothetically, I would just want to tell my younger self that you don't deserve it. Like, that you don't deserve to be punished for your existence. That's probably the only thing. And believe your feelings, believe your sort of feelings that you are a woman, because that is something that I learned way later than I would like to, for example.
Thank you so much, Georgia. Shaneel.
Young Indigenous queer youth already know that they are different. They don't need to be told that they are different. I think what they don't know is that being different does not make them any less worthy of love, respect, and dignity. I think that what they don't know is that they don't need to change themselves to be enough. And I just hope that young Indigenous queer youth would be told that they are enough. And I think that there is so much, and just speaking about me makes me really emotional. It's just that there is so much harm that's been done to Indigenous communities in the world, and I just don't see the queer community recognizing that as a whole. And I honestly cannot wait for the day where we truly, genuinely start to honor the people who fought for our rights. Because if Black trans women did not fight for my rights, I wouldn't be here. So I wish that someone would tell the pioneers of queer rights that they are enough and that they belong in this community, that this community exists because of them.
Thank you. I can see everyone nodding. I can feel it in my heart too. Thank you so much for that. You've kind of just touched on one thing I just wanted to ask for you before we go to the Q&A is one call to action that that people watching can take. So Shaneel, you yeah, go for it.
I would say that allyship is not optional. So if you cannot be consistent, you cannot be trusted. Supporting queer people on the internet is a good thing. Do not stop doing that. However, you need to show up for queer people in person. I'll give you an example. In New Zealand, we had the Black Lives Matter protest. In one city, 20,000 people showed up when it was just Black Lives Matter. Only about 150 people showed up for Black trans lives. And that just shows you that how complacent cisgendered and straight people are when it comes to fighting for trans people. Allyship is not optional, and I think if you are going to be an ally, if you're going to call yourself an ally, you've got to show up for every intersection of the community.
Absolutely. Thank you. Georgia, do you have one call to action for people watching?
I have a unusual call to action, and that's go vote in your elections, because that actually can change a lot, and many people don't do that. So do it.
Thank you, Georgia. And Issy, one call to action for our lovely audience.
I think this is applicable to cis bisexual people. Show up for your trans friends, show up for your trans communities. This is something that's being polarized so massively within the queer community to split how people identify. So bisexual people, show up, support, debunk, get ready with your information and bring your activism from online into your everyday life, because you do have privilege within this community and it is your responsibility to use that as best you can.
What a fantastic set of actions. You heard it here. Allyship is not optional. Go vote and take action and show up for your trans friends. What a great set of actions. We're going to go to the Facebook questions now. So the first question we've got coming through is, what are the unique challenges that young people face in campaigning? Is anyone ready to answer? You don't have to all of you answer this one.
Do you want to go
Georgia? Yeah.
first? Oh, okay,
No,
I'm gonna
fine.
go first. I'm gonna go first then. I think the biggest challenge young people face in campaigning is they often, because they are younger, they do not have that much experience as their older counterparts, and they are often mad. I don't believe this is really an issue in Amnesty, but in other organizations, they're often mad. So you are too young. You can understand that, and I think this is probably the biggest challenge. And even though there are many good things that young people bring to the table, for example, they have new, fresh perspectives. They were born into this world, so they got more used to the new technologies that they basically learned to live with from the very early age. But often we are sort of being reminded that we are way too young for this, and this is probably the biggest challenge I can think of.
Thank you. Issy, do you want to jump in? And then we'll go to Shaneel.
I think as well, for young people, it can depend where they live. And I know that feels so trivial, but in the UK, here in my rural county, I really struggled to connect. And when you're a young person and you're an activist, connecting with other people and bouncing your ideas off each other and calling each other out and challenging each other is fundamental to your growth as a person and as an activist. And so if we don't have those people around us, then it can feel very, very lonely. So I think finding a community and feeling comfortable is a huge challenge for lots of young people, especially in my experience.
Thank you, Issy. And Shaneel.
I think, and this is probably very radical to say, that the challenge for me as a young person are old people. So take J.K. Rowling, for example. Oh my God, J.K. stop rolling. No. So you've got TERFs, and let it be known that there is no such thing as TERFs, because if you exclude trans people, you are not a feminist of any kind. So you've got old people who have platforms, and you've got old people who are well known, but have absolutely no expertise, have absolutely no idea about what they're talking about, and putting out so much hate towards people. And that has been so incredibly damaging for young people who are being activists. All the years of work just get completely destroyed by one tweet. People need to be mindful of what they put out, especially if those aren't facts and they're just plain feelings.
Yes, we're seriously nodding, seriously agreeing with you. I'm really enjoying the like just the diversity of like answers that you're all giving us. So there's no like weird thing to say or different opinion here. It's yeah, it's just really great to hear everything that you're saying. Being reminded that you're young by adults. Yeah, adults can kind of suck sometimes. We're sorry. I think it just highlights the importance of having those thinking about privilege, like thinking about what you said earlier, Issy, about creating a space and making sure it's actually caring for communities there, caring for young people. I got another question that came through the Facebook Q&A. This question actually ties on to just exactly what we were saying. It's how can adults / older people be great allies, younger activists? And I'd really love to hear any particular examples that you have. Issy, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I think a couple of examples that have sprung to mind actually come really nicely off what you said there, Shaneel. So I think older people can be great allies by searching for spaces where they can ask questions freely without damaging or being harmful to certain people or parts of our community. So if you have questions about something you don't understand because you've read a tweet that's based on fiction, come to an ally, come to somebody who has privilege in that scenario, who can take the time to explain it to you. It is not for trans people to be having to put themselves out there and front all of that hatred. Older people can navigate spaces where they can learn safely without causing further damage. And I think that just do some research. Google exists, and just be mindful of continuously learning and know that it's okay to unlearn some things that have always existed within you. You can unlearn, and it's a process, but it's the best thing that you can do, I think.
I love that. It's okay to unlearn as well. Shaneel, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that as well.
I would just say that as adults or people who are older, one, donating is a great option. Two, voting in the interest of young queer people, because voting is very important. A lot of people will tell you that you can keep your personal life out of politics. As queer people, we don't have the privilege. Politics is personal because politics dictates every single aspect of my life. If you can choose to stay out of politics, you are very, very privileged. I'm going to add that as queer people, and I've already said that we don't owe anything to allies. There's Google. If you're old enough to have an Instagram, if you have a phone, there's nothing stopping you from using Google. So search that stuff up before you make a queer person do the emotional labor for you. And if you look it up, diversity, if you hire someone to give you advice on diverse communities, they will charge you hundreds of dollars an hour. So why do queer people have to do it for free?
Yeah, well said. Use your adults and older people, use your allies, use Google, not young people to do that work for you. Georgia, do you want to add anything to that question? How can adults and older people be great allies to young activists?
I think I have one thing in mind, and that is empower them. I had a fortune that I had number of great older activists who have been great mentors to me. They showed me the way how, well, obviously they had more experience than me because I am very young. So they showed me how to do this and how to do that and how to best have an impact, make sure that your sort of work has an impact. And I think this is really something that when adults do to us, it's really much appreciated, and I can't thank enough to every single adult who did that for me.
Thank you. I wonder if there were any specific examples that you had in mind that you could share to people watching. Or we could go on to them.
It would be a specific people, so I would say genuinely in Amnesty Czech Republic, I had number of great mentors. Most probably I would mention Peter, who is currently the chair of the board of Amnesty Czech Republic. He had number of great advice to me, and also probably the entire board and few members of the office. So yeah, there are a lot of people who I would like to thank.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's really nice to hear. Really nice to see what can happen when there is that mentorship and exchange of learning, I suppose. I've got one more question. This is on cancel culture. So cancel culture is in the news a lot at the moment. Can you share what you think about it? Shaneel, would you like to start off with that one that made you chuckle?
Cancel culture is a very, very interesting one, and it is not a new concept. Marginalized communities have been cancelled for speaking out for years. Only when it starts to affect bigots is cancel culture a problem. I think we really need to question ourselves on why is cancel culture a problem now that it is affecting people who are homophobic or racist. And that is what really bugs me about cancel culture. I am not for cancel culture. When I was 15 years old, I would fight you that there is no such thing as they, them. Now I identify as they, them. Thank God I wasn't cancelled. But the problem here is that it's only become an issue when it's starting to affect privileged people. Cancel culture limits people's growth and accountability to grow. So we shouldn't cancel people for making a mistake. But take J.K. Rowling for an example. She's not making any mistake. She's a grown adult. She's a billionaire, and she's constantly making uneducated tweets. So we're not canceling her. She's just a bigot, and we know it. And there's no coming back from that.
Well said. Issy, would you like to share anything about what you think about cancel culture? Oh, I think you're muted. Sorry.
You muted.
Oh.
Go for it.
Hear
We can
you.
hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So everything I was going to say, Shaneel really hit the nail on the head there. We have to think about why things are becoming buzzwords at certain times, and the context around those. And in this scenario, it's being pushed by a group of people who want the freedom to put hate out into the world. And that's very, very different than being a responsible person and taking accountability. So Shaneel said it excellently.
Yeah, totally. These mechanisms have been happening before we had these words, and against the communities who they're trying to uplift or give more voice to. Exactly. Georgia, would you like to add anything?
I don't think I have anything to add. I just think, yes, there we should differentiate when a person is making a mistake, because I often do it too. I often, for example, yesterday I was writing a paper for Amnesty Czech Republic, and I was thinking oh, is this the appropriate word? Because, for example, I am non-binary person, so I don't know what are all the appropriate words to use. So I can make a mistake, and I believe that's okay. I apologize for it, but there are people, and like you said, who are not making mistakes, but they are just hurting us, and that needs to be stopped.
Yeah, and I like that you shared that. It's a really nice way to just be a bit more human and not get defensive when we do make mistakes and slip up. I know we had another question, but I don't think we'll have quite enough time to reach that one around facing defensive responses. But yeah, if you make a mistake, please just apologize and move on, just acknowledge it. So the last questions we're going to end on before I wrap up our show is, what is the one message that you would like every young activist around the world to hear? I know you've shared some really awesome points so far. Maybe, even if you just wanted to repeat something, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying something again. Sometimes we need to hear it a few times, right? Issy, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I'd just like to repeat that you are enough. Your experience is valid and worthy, and however long it takes you to come into the activism world and whatever that looks like for you, you are absolutely making a difference. And then I also would just like to repeat, bisexual people stand with your trans community. I think it is so incredibly important, and there's so much work that can be done around that. So just, you're enough, and keep going.
Thank you. And Georgia?
I completely agree with Issa here, and I would also like to add that activism makes sense. It has done enormous things in the past. We talked about Stonewall riots, but also more unknown things, for example, labor rights and all this interesting stuff that happened in the past. So I think even if you don't, for example, change the world, but convince one person or improve conditions in your local centers or something, it counts, because you are making a change, and every single piece of change is amazing.
Thank you. Shaneel?
I would say that queer people cannot continue to exist in systems that are anti-Indigenous, because queerness is fundamentally and inherently Indigenous. I would say that your existence is a revolution. And finally, don't be racist. Yeah, I just can't. Like, how else do you tell people not to be racist? Just don't be racist.
Thank you so much. I had actual goosebumps during those last few comments there. Thank you, Shaneel. Thank you, Issy. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Max. Thank you, everyone watching and everyone submitting questions. I would love to just give you a round of applause. I'm not going to clap. I'm going to do some sign language applause. Please join me in that. This has been so special, so precious. I'm so happy that we had this conversation. I feel really lucky to have sat with all of you today, actually. Yeah, really, thank you all. So just before we leave, I'd just like to highlight one of the many human rights defenders Amnesty is working with at the moment, who we're going to be asking you to take action for. Elizbieta Podlesna was charged with 2 years in prison after being accused of owning a poster with the Virgin Mary with a rainbow halo. Elizbieta is one of many activists who are being attacked for taking a stand against discrimination in Poland. And since May 2019, Elżbieta has been under investigation for the offence of offending religious beliefs for the alleged use of this poster. In a disappointing development last week, she was officially charged with risk up to 2 years in prison. So please do join Amnesty UK and email the Polish Prosecutor General today and demand that the charges are dropped immediately. Let's make sure our LGBTQ communities worldwide are safe to express themselves and live their fullest authentic lives. Rest in power, Sarah Hegazi. Thank you everyone again for joining us tonight. A good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending where you are. But I hope you have a happy Pride and stay safe. Thank you.